Hello and welcome to this episode of the GrowVC Everyone Funding Startups podcast. I'm your host Marcus, and today we're talking to Josh Breinlinger, who currently works as a senior associate at Sigma Partners, a venture capital firm in Menlo Park. So first of all, thank you, Josh, for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's start off with some background. Why don't you briefly introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. So my name's Josh Breinlinger. Once upon a time, I was a mechanical engineer, MIT student, and basically went into consulting for about 4 years at a company called Arthur D. Little. It's a management and engineering consulting company in Boston. And I had a great time there for 4 years. It was really kind of a dream job as far as mechanical engineering goes, because companies would come to us with just big problems that they couldn't solve and frankly write us a big check and say, okay, we need a low emission fuel injector and we don't know how to do it. Go run with that. Or, really interesting projects like Kentucky Fried Chicken actually came to us and said, hey, we want to break the world record for the largest chicken pot pie. So we need to bake a 45-foot chicken pot pie in Central Park. How do we do that? And so it was really great problem-solving sort of thing back in my mechanical engineering roots. About 4 years after I was doing that, I got the opportunity to join Odesk as the fourth employee. And I actually started as the director of sales, which was a big career change for me. But on the very first sales call that I was doing, I was talking to the customer and showed them a demo of the Odesk platform, and they basically just took it away. They were like, oh my God, this is incredible. This is exactly what I was looking for. So, immediately I realized that this was a really big opportunity and switched careers, moved from Boston to San Francisco, and ended up at Odesk for about 5 years in a variety of different roles, pretty much as any early employee will do. I did everything from sales to running product to operations and community and customer service, and then really spent the bulk of my time there in marketing and business development. And then about a year and a half ago, I moved on from Odesk, really just because it was becoming a later stage company, and I personally prefer the earlier stage challenges. So I moved on to an online advertising company briefly and headed up marketing and product. And shortly after that, I was approached by Sigma Partners to join the team and help them find other great startups.
You made the transition to VC. Was it last year?
Yeah, it was about exactly 1 year ago, August of 2010.
Okay, what was the transition like? Was it what you had anticipated?
Yes and no. In the process of, deciding whether or not to take the role, I talked with a lot of different VCs and a lot of different partners. And, there's sort of pros and cons to anything. And some of the negatives, or big differences, I suppose, are really the pace. So when you're an entrepreneur, you're hustling all the time. You're trying to move as quickly as possible. You're making decisions really quickly and implementing things really quickly. VC is, especially in the VC that we do, which is not small angel investments, but more Series A rounds of typically our sweet spot is 2 to 6 million. We really make very few but very big decisions each year. So there's only a handful of investments that we're going to make each year. And so you sort of intentionally don't want to rush into things. And, one of the partners really almost warned me ahead of time, is like, you're going to be frustrated by the pace because you'll see a company, you'll get really excited by it. Oh my God, this is so cool. And then it's, okay, let's spend, weeks, if not a month, researching and doing diligence and really looking at all the competitors. And so things basically move a little bit slower, which is certainly a big change from entrepreneurship. But, it's even more rewarding than I had imagined in terms of, I meet fantastic entrepreneurs every single day, and I learn a ton about their industries, about their segments, about emerging technologies. And so that part is great. I think on the plus side, the biggest surprise is how much you learn in venture capital. It's really an amazingly rewarding position.
I mean, we've talked before as well. For example, we've talked with David Hornick on what a curious profession it can be. So for many entrepreneurs, it is a mysterious occupation, So what was it that kind of got you over the fence to actually make that move? What was the biggest pro that you saw before you actually transitioned?
Yeah, it definitely is, and there's an interesting mystique to VC that sort of goes away pretty quickly once you join the VC industry. But I think the biggest positive is really just the learning and the network. The what I talked about when I joined, I was most excited about. One, just growing my network, meeting great VCs, great entrepreneurs every day. It's the best possible networking opportunity in the world, as far as I'm concerned. So that was a huge plus. And really the learning in terms of, I do believe that, in my future, I'd like to go back to the entrepreneurial side and found my own company and hopefully grow it to be successful. And I think being in VC really helps you with pattern recognition issues. You really start to see what are the companies that make it and what are the companies that don't, and what are the patterns you see in those different companies. And so the opportunity to learn from other entrepreneurs and the companies that we're seeing in our portfolio companies was really enough for me to take the plunge and jump on board.
And your perspective as a VC must have changed a little bit, at least comparing to that of an entrepreneur. How do you think you've been able to apply your own background from the startup space to working as a VC?
I think most VCs, well, every VC will tell you, we're always looking for three things: great teams, great products, and massive markets. That's sort of the universal thing that VCs are looking for. And I think that, most VCs will also tell you that team is by far the most important. This is really a people business. And I think that having been an entrepreneur and having walked in those shoes, it's easier to identify the other great entrepreneurs. I think if I hadn't had that experience, I wouldn't be as good of a judge of entrepreneurs and their skills. And, oftentimes it's the little things. I'll be in a meeting and be hearing a pitch, and some of the things that impress me the most aren't even in the pitch deck. They're some little anecdote of some scrappy tactic that the entrepreneur employed, whether it's, knocking on doors in their neighborhood to find potential customers, or, Airbnb has the sort of famous story about the selling the cereal boxes, the Obama O's. That probably would never make it into their pitch deck, but those are the impressive stories. And so I think that having been an entrepreneur, I have an increased appreciation for those sort of things. So I do think it really helps me identify the best entrepreneurs that we meet with.
Did you work with VCs before as an entrepreneur?
Certainly, but to a much more limited extent. I worked with our board members quite a bit, and worked on some ideas with them, and was involved in some of the pitches, but it was fairly limited. So I didn't have nearly as much exposure, obviously, as I do today.
Looking back at that time as an entrepreneur, is there anything that you would have done differently had you known what you know today as a VC?
That's an interesting question. So, I think we probably would have paid a little bit more attention to high level trends. So one of the things you get as a VC, and actually one of the warnings that I've received going into VC is, hey, if you spend more than a couple of years in venture capital, it's going to be really tough to go back into an operational role, because you sort of gradually, go up and up and up, and you start looking at the world from a 30,000-foot level. Whereas as an entrepreneur, you're always in the weeds, trying to grow the numbers day by day. And so, you're looking at Google Analytics every day, making sure things are going up. And I think as an entrepreneur, it's sometimes hard to get out of that mode and look up. And so you get stuck in those weeds, and you may not recognize some of the larger trends until, not necessarily it's too late, but you could have certainly acted sooner. And so I think having both experience now as an entrepreneur and a VC, I think gives me a better balance of, I can go down and execute and operate at a daily level, but I can also go up and look at things from a 30,000-foot level and see some of the big trends, and, I don't want to say pivot, but, evolve the company to meet those mega trends.
Yeah, and I guess that's a very relevant point, since as an entrepreneur, you do kind of get stuck in that day to day, even, regardless of if you actually take time off and try to get that perspective, it is still harder to get that, 30,000 feet perspective, and it might even be impossible to a certain extent.
I know it's tough. I've seen some companies that are so focused on the short term, trying to keep the chart going up and to the right, really a big part of the driver is just to sort of please VCs. It's like, oh my gosh, we're going to need